I'm glad to have this opportunity to present about this very interesting topic, which is becoming a new passion of mine. And I would like to start by reading this statement because it reflects a lot of probably the 80s and the 70s born generation about what we think about AI. So this is Alan Turing. He was the father of what's considered the modern computer. So he says it seems probable that once the machine thinking method has started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. They would be able to converse with each other, to sharpen their wits. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machine to take over. So what is AI? AI is a system's ability to correctly interpret external data, to learn from such data, and to use those learning to achieve specific goals and tasks through flexible adaptation. I think this definition actually is something I don't think that I can do very well myself. So I would encourage any one of you who's here just to try and log on this website and see, will robots take our job? It will show you interesting findings. The good news is, at least for the time being, anyone knows who this guy is? Have anyone come across him? Okay, this is the first AI minister in the whole world. He's in the Emirates, and he's Dr. Omar al-Ulama. So at least AI had brought one job that we know of right now, okay? Okay, things that you need to know about AI is that AI is a very old concept. It was invented around 1943. And in medicine, actually, Gunn was the first to successfully use the AI technology in surgery. And the important dates for us as ophthalmologists, as physicians, would be that the first FDA grant for AI medical technology was given in 2017, and in ophthalmology specifically, the IDX software was the first FDA cleared AI system to automatically detect diabetic retinopathy. I think it's stuck. Okay. One other important date is the involvement of Google in AI, where actually they had a very famous company called DeepMind investigating and looking into different kind of data in the eye as well. So the MIT management, the Sloan School has showed this report where they actually talk about the huge interest these days in AI. Most importantly is that machine learning remains the most common focus of research, followed by neural network and computer vision. And enrollment in the schools is on the rise. If you have any kids, you should let them know about this because everyone is going in this direction. So what is machine learning? Because this is what we actually care about in our models in medicine and ophthalmology specifically. It's a process in which machine writes its own programming and learns to complete a task on its own. It uses training data set and validation data set. So if it has, okay, so I'll give you an example. In the case of diabetic retinopathy, we have this data set that we examine, and then the algorithm is created and it tests those data in relation to the ophthalmologist. Okay. Dr. Patrick, I think this is the only picture I've seen you wearing a tie. So I was glad to find it. The ophthalmologist will look at the data, and then he would he would be the gold standard, whether it's the best. It goes and it's accurately detected as diabetic retinopathy in this case. If it does not, or if it gets a high rate of error, the machine will reevaluate its algorithm, and then will go in and change its ways, the things that actually measures the internal mechanisms within the algorithm itself. The machine is then fed the same training data again and produces the answer set of answers. Produces a new set of answers. This process occurs indefinitely, so it will remain studying the same data until it gives you a plateau or the desired output that you actually want. And in the final sensitivity and specificity and accuracy scores can be checked, and then you'll test it again, validation data set for external validity. So what made this interest in AI these days? AI, I said, was here for a long time. Actually, machine learning was coined in the 50s. And what made this happen now? So the grand AI discovery was deep learning. And this is that you could take a huge data with single domain and learn to predict at superhuman accuracy. This small graph here shows you the state of things in the past. So we used to have the approaches of other approaches of AI, which actually was evolving in a steady pace, and then the neural network, which is a part of machine learning that is deep learning, has evolved. And the other thing that's very important is that we actually have amount of data that exponentially increased. In the past, we used to have data that was not in the form of digital data that we can access, and these days we have a huge amount of data in all fields and ophthalmology. So what is machine learning algorithm? I talked earlier about machine learning, that we actually would teach the machine how to understand the image of a diabetic retinopathy. But there are different ways to do that. You can teach, you can do this through unsupervised machine learning, which is something that's used in many fields, but in medicine specifically, we would rather have something that's supervised. And under the supervised machine learning, we have the neural network, which can be either a simple one or a deep learning neural network, which is what we call deep learning. So this is an example of a set of machine learning set which a part of the machine learning, which is supervised learning, and you can see this regression here, which actually is shown on two planes, and then you can start to wrap your hand up around this. But when it starts to get on different planes, it gets a little bit complicated for your mind. And then when you get multiple planes of data analysis, it's something that your mind probably cannot comprehend. A convolutional neural network is one of the types of the neural networks, and it starts without any tuning and gives random results, then progressively learn the combination and the permutation of important features, while learning to ignore important features or unimportant features like artifacts. These are the layers that are within the deep neural network, where actually the data is interconnected and pass through different layers before you get the end or the output layer. So back to medicine. In medicine, as you can see in this pie chart, the largest part here is actually the part that's on diagnostic imaging. And diagnostic imaging, and specifically on screening tools. The reason is because this is the low-hanging fruit. You can start and get good results and then go into more complicated and deeper layers. There are other modalities like electrodiagnosis, genetic diagnosis, and clinical labs. So why the eye? The reason is very simple. these are all examples of tests and data points that we can acquire from an eye. So actually, the eye can be readily and precisely imaged, and there are huge amount of data from the eye. We also have established models of telescreening, so the need of a reading center, which by itself can be a weak link in the process of telemedicine. So how can AI help ophthalmology? AI-based grading algorithms may be used to identify which patient should be referred to ophthalmologists for evaluation. It has already demonstrated proof of concept in medical fields such as radiology, pathology, dermatology, which are deeply rooted in diagnostic imaging. The need for workload reduction. Our clinics are burdened with long waiting lists and patients unfortunately arriving at late stage of their diseases. And promote personalized medicine. An example of that would be later if we have a special lens that can help you actually image your retina, and then not even needing to go to the physician's office. It can also AI can also recognize disease-specific patterns and correlate novel features to gain innovative scientific insight, which is something we'll discuss later. So, diabetic retinopathy. As you will see, the big breakthroughs in this field are actually mostly in diabetic retinopathy, and the reason is that deep learning in disease is really good once you have 10,000 image. Diabetic retinopathy screening has been proven to be cost effective. Deep learning is good for the lack of supply of physicians. An example of that would be in India, where actually there are 127,000 ophthalmologists short of the number that they need. And for this, they have 45% who suffer visual loss before even presenting. In addition to the strength and potential for these studies to be better than screening guidelines recommendations for regular diabetic screening. What we have now is this software. It's called IDX. I'm sure those of you who have been to any meeting have seen its booth. It's in everywhere. This is a software that actually gained FDA approval in 2018, and basically it was developed. They had automated analysis of retinal fundus, where they actually coined a lot of the terms that they had a system that reached an area under the curve of 0.84, and in 2016 they actually managed to validate it through a data set, the classification of diabetic retinopathy screening, where they actually are using in their own machines. So they call it referable diabetic retinopathy when there is moderate NPDR, severe NPDR, PDR, or diabetic macular edema, or vision-threatening diabetic retinopathy, where they're actually severe NPDR, PDR, or diabetic macular edema. And they've shown a specificity and sensitivity of 97 and 87% respectively in the referable diabetic retinopathy, and 100% sensitivity and specificity of 91% in the vision-threatening diabetic retinopathy, where actually they did not miss any case of diabetic macular edema, which is an interesting finding by itself, knowing that they actually screen diabetic fundus photos. So they achieved a de novo pre-market review pathway, license, and it's actually available in the market. And the idea is very simple. You show the picture, the model looks at it, tells you this is referable, non-referable, and the patient gets the diagnosis on spot. Okay, the other model of the media hype is about, which is the Google model. Google actually have two models. The first one was they always refer to as the JAMA paper, which is a tool for detection of diabetic retinopathy, and they used deep learning models. How the ophthalmologist had their sensitivity in comparison to the dark line here, which is actually very comparable. Basically, they adapted a deep neural network where they actually have 26 layers of CNN, the convolutional neural network, which analyzed and showed different stages as we know as diabetic. So they identified the diabetic retinopathy through fundus photographs, and they did this against manual grading. They had two validation sets defined as moderate or worse or referable macular edema by a panel of 7 US board-certified ophthalmologists. The first set was around 9,963, and the second set was a larger one. And they describe a lot about how actually the AI learns about how it views the fundus fundus photo, because we need to know that the AI is actually does not have a preconception about what actually is an optic nerve or macula or the blood vessels. So a lot of the work that was done is to actually familiarize the model with these functions. And they call this housekeeping function. And then they took the AI through 130,000 images, and then they validated on the 1/3 of those images. A very interesting picture is this one, because so this is how you view the fundus photo, and then after analysis, this is how the AI looks at it. And what's interesting here is actually that this is something that is an artifact, this one as well, and then the machine recognizes it as an artifact, which can be something that an untrained eye would think of as a lesion. The big event that happened and all the hype was about was this article, which is the one that was published in Nature Medicine, and this was a study that was based on OCTs. So basically what they did is that they would take a set of OCTs, and then because you have a lot of data that you can get from an OCT, so looking at all the data at once can give you different results that can be confusing. So they manually segmented the areas where actually the pathologies are. And then after they segmented those manually by the physicians themselves, they showed it to the machine. And then it understood that segmentation of the data in this picture would mean that you can see something through it. So it's not just basically seeing the whole image as one, but getting each segment on its own. And then each segment was an example of a segment issue that they had was an example of a disease and the OCT. So this is why where you see those lines here. And then they defined those cases as urgent, referable or referral suggestions for whoever does this imaging. So basically, you have an OCT again. The OCT is looked at by the machine, and then it will give you a recommendation whether this patient needs urgent or semi-urgent or just needs no follow-up. And basically, this is how the machine looks at the image. This is how it's segmented manually, and this is how the machine looks at it. So basically, you can see that those actually are exactly the same. And then they took those results, and this is the interesting part, is that they took the OCTs themselves that was analyzed by the model, and compared it to an ophthalmologist who had seen probably the patient and looked at the fundus photos and even read the notes of the patient. And they compared how they did in comparison to the model. And they saw that the model, based on the OCT only, actually predicted more precisely the degree of referral urgency that the patient needs. Probably this will be shown here even better, where you actually see the OCT here. This is the model, and how it behaved, and this is how the percentage of how significantly better it did. And compared to the first retina specialist, it basically, who had OCT knowledge and had the fundus photos and knew the patient or saw the notes of the patient, they behaved the same. Whereas the other specialists actually did things that you don't see on the exam from the data that it acquires. These are other examples of other uses in retina where they used it as a method to detect macular edema. And there are a lot of studies in AMD where they tested it using fundus photos and OCTs as well. And MacTel. There is also a study on AI on ROP, which showed very promising results. Also in glaucoma, there is the rationale of using AI was to detect glaucomatous disc, which has manifested visual field loss. So you look at the fundus photos, and then you could predict from the fundus photos how a visual field would look like. It's also using AI to determine which disc will progress, because you have those patients, and basically you know some of them have the same appearance of the disc, and then they will progress at different rates. They also looked at the idea of Kalman forecasting. Kalman forecasting was the method they looked at when they were trying to get to the moon, and basically to target what do you expect in terms of the IOP on the long term. These are all the software that has been developed for fundus photos only. And these are also software that have been developed for OCTs. Also in anterior segment, there are different software that has been models that has looked on different areas in dry eye and refractive errors and keratoconus. And an interesting one would be the refractive error, which actually was based on a fundus photo. So basically, the fundus photo through it, you could tell if a patient is a hyperope or a myope or has astigmatism just based on the fundus photo itself. In pediatrics, they actually used it to detect which patient will actually develop amblyopia from a cataract and which won't, and basically base the decision on that. And in addition to those, these are fields that everyone is thinking of. There are actually discoveries that no one has actually thought of, which basically is where you actually use the data and the analysis of the data to look at biomarkers that probably, as a physician, you never thought that they are that show any disease. And this happened in some of the neurological diseases, where they looked at fundus photos of patients with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and they would tell, in addition to the OCTs, and they would tell how they can diagnose those conditions through the OCT itself. There's also a big study about cardiovascular diseases risks, where actually you can predict from a fundus photo whether the patient has it. And this was done by deep learning. There's also a lot of talk about deep variant, which is a model that was developed by Google to look into genetic variation and correlation to clinical diseases. Okay, so basically, we are actually in an interesting time in terms of what AI can achieve. This is not just in terms of eye health or medicine, in terms of what we can get in life in general. And the problem is we always, as human, tend to overestimate or underestimate what would happen through any new technology. So basically, if you look at things from the way they are in the past, depending on how you look, you would think probably this is a very interesting times and everything is going to change. Or if you're a pessimist, you think that these are just hypes that people are actually just interested about, and in the long term, they will just fade away. And there's an interesting thought on that, where actually you think of progress as an S-shaped curve, where you actually get those new paradigms, and in the beginning you have very high expectation, but they're like plateaued, and then suddenly something opens up, and then you get this spike in progress. And this is what's happening now with the AI and machine learning specifically. And then with time you start to get to a plateau again, and then probably you look for another area. So we talked about a lot of nice things about AI, but what are the challenges that we actually are facing with this kind of technology? There's a very famous term that everybody's using, which is machine learning is like a black box, because data goes in and then data comes out. You don't actually know what's happening inside. And this is very challenging when you look at it from two aspects. The first aspect would be if you're a person that's skeptical of everything, and you have like a conspiracy theory where you think that someone is actually playing with the algorithm, and that's why you're getting those results. And the other part would be in terms of scientifically, because we have a scientific method where we actually can produce results and then test them and then show that they actually are true based on the scientific method we're using. But in a lot of cases in AI, you don't find this. And this can be difficult to replicate in clinical studies in general. But there has been things there are things that has been done on that, because some of the AIs are built to be explainable, and then you can through it interpret some of the data in those kind of AIs. And actually in the deep learning, in the DeepMind model in Google, they showed some of the pictures, and they were showing how the AI is actually looking to a picture where they actually focus on certain areas, like if they have image recognition which looks into dogs, different kind of dogs, and then if the AI suspects it's a certain kind of dog, it would look at the mouth, or it would focus on that area. It's like a heat map where actually the AI would look at. And so this can probably is a very early time to talk about this, but it's a possible way to solve this issue. Another issue, I don't know if any of you have seen this before. Okay. What is it? You know what is it? Exactly. They actually take your fundus photo, yours. So which is very interesting. So basically, what the thought on this is that actually the fundus photo is actually like a fingerprint, which is actually unique for each individual. And if you think about this in terms of privacy, it is a way to look at it. There is a way to look at it as a fingerprint. So if you have your data taken and then analyzed by different entities, different companies, and who knows where, you basically are exposing yourself or your privacy to others. Of course, whether this can be linked to you individually is something that is not at this stage possible, but you never know. So iris scans are ways to actually you go into a country by iris scan. So why not fundus photo in the future? So privacy is a very big issue in dealing with machine learning and the big data that's generated from it. There is also a very nice article that was published in the AMA Journal of Ethics where they actually looked at the ethical part of it. I would recommend any of you who's interested in reading this. It's a very nice article, but they looked at it in different ways. Part of it was privacy, but one interesting part was actually teaching the new generation of students or physicians. So if you teach them how to use the AI, would they actually need to learn a lot of the stuff that actually need to be learned? And this can be a challenging thing to look into in the future. Another big issue is the kind of data that you have. So a lot of the data that we have can seem good. So we have a big amount of let's say fundus photos in our servers, but we're actually, if you look into them, are these data that you can use? There are other examples of that in terms of statistics, when you look at different kind of statistics in different fields, where you actually whatever you put in the system, if it's not accurate, you will always get false results at the end. And finally, in terms of challenges, is the trust. So, robotic surgery is a way that's been. This idea has been started, but basically, would you trust an AI without any physician's opinion to look at your investigation and say that you're okay or not okay? I think in medicine we actually have reached this threshold a while ago, when we actually depend a lot on some tests where actually it just recommends for you whether you treat or not, whether you understand what's in it or not. But it's a challenging thing for a patient probably. And at the end, I just want to talk about our experience in KKISH. We had a pilot study which was a validation of a novel fully automated disease grading software, which supports telemedicine-based diagnosis of sight-threatening condition of diabetic retinopathy. Generally, the idea of the screening diabetics is always good. We have a big population in Saudi Arabia, and the need of doing a dilated fundus exam has created a huge amount of waiting list, and this actually ends up with the patients turning out in a very late stage of their diseases. A telemedicine screening program will be a very good tool. However, having this kind of program will also create a backlog of patients who actually need to be their images to be read. Whether you have this amount of physicians that can do this is a very difficult thing to actually answer. And having a reading center, we actually train non-doctors to look at images, is a challenging task by itself, because most of those people, when they reach a certain stage, of understanding, they will look into probably another less boring job to do. Looking into a model of machine learning would be a good supplement for such a telemedicine program. So in this pilot, we included adult patients with who are diabetics, and with clear media, and compared them to the gold standard, which is actually two ophthalmologists who looked at the same images. And the degree of agreement between automated analysis and manual grading was quantified and assessed using statistical analysis tools, and sensitivity and specificity was considered significant if it was less than 0.05. In this small pilot, we actually had 101 images, and there was 8 images that was excluded due to poor quality, based on the AI grading, and it was removed from the calculation. So compared with the gold standard, the sensitivity of the detecting diabetic retinopathy was 97.7, and all the images that had no disease were actually graded correctly through this software. So the AI accuracy was found to be 97.85 compared to the gold standard. So it's basically a promising pilot, which actually will help us in probably looking into a bigger sample and then having a better validation for this kind of software. But it was something that's very readily available and can be used, and probably would be a very good tool to use in a telemedicine program. So what's the future? The future can be would be into looking into those data and studying in different ways, because what we saw from that case of actually getting to diagnose hyperopia or myopia from the fundus and knowing if a patient has a high risk of cardiovascular disease through just looking to a fundus photo, is that there are things that we actually don't understand, and probably a machine that looked into much higher number of eyes than any one would do in his lifetime would be able to detect and probably look at. I remember probably Dr. Sosan Welati admires Dr. Gass because he had this very sharp eye that looks into unique things in each eye and then detects those. Probably an AI with who saw the number of patients that he saw, or maybe 10 or 100 or even 10,000 times more would be able to detect other things that he was not able to see. So this is a very interesting times for ophthalmology. It's a simple way to do things. We just need to have the interest, there is no much that you will spend doing it. Basically what you need is a computer that has a GPU, which is something that you can buy on your own dime, actually, like a friend of mine, Dr. Adi, actually did. And then probably you would be able to look into the data yourself and then discover new things. You don't need to have a lot of people working for you and looking into files and digging into a lot of the data that you need in files. You have a lot of the data in front of you, and probably you could discover something huge in the near future. So I would encourage all of you to look into this. Probably you'll find something with that interest. So again, at the end, this is an invitation for any of you who's interested in any of those projects to read about it. Come to me, talk to me. Maybe we can think of something that we can work on, and probably we get something nice happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Akili, for a very inspirational lecture and very interesting. Any comments or questions from the audience?
Thank you, Adel, for the nice overview. I remember in one of the SO meetings, one presenter mentioned a study that he reviewed for ophthalmology, and in that study, the artificial intelligence that they used was able to detect if the patient was male or female from the photo, and in 97% of the time. So he, as a reviewer, he said, I don't believe this, and I will send the authors my data set, and I will see if their machine will be able to do this. And
he's a smart
indeed,
guy.
it did the same thing. It tells and 97% of the time, it can tell if it is a male or female. And the age as well. So my question is, what does it take to develop artificial intelligence software? So we can develop something here. We have the data, definitely. But what does it take to develop one? We don't want to buy an artificial intelligence.
So actually, there is a very interesting article that that talked about AI that writes its own AI. So basically, I mean, now it's when you go to the meetings, you see people talking about ophthalmologists just writing a very simple code and creating a model that actually they're using themselves. It's a very simple task. Myself, I'm not a coder, but I read recently a lot of books in Python, and it's not that complicated. This is if you want to do it yourself, which is I mean not a very I mean it could be for a person who is interested, but having someone who has the very simple knowledge of writing a code. And a very simple PC with a GPU with all this data set. The only problem would be the issue of privacy and how we can deal. So if you actually have those very simple tools, the PC, and someone who knows how to write codes, you can do it in your own setting. And actually, I've been approached by some I mean college students who actually are very interested in this kind of projects, and they actually would want to volunteer their time just to work on stuff like that. So I mean, I think just having simply a PC with a GPU, and you'll be okay.
Thank you, Dr. Adel, for a nice presentation and keeping this in mind for future. I think we are optimistic, and hopefully with your talk, mostly we are optimistic, but something that we need to keep in mind, we are lucky in ophthalmology that we have medical and surgical, and we have diagnostic and intervention. And for the intervention, all the time being, we are safe to a certain extent. I'm not sure about the future. But our colleague in specialty like radiology, they are starting to lose their job. So I'm not so skeptical if the people, they will do the same in ophthalmology. So this is a simple comment. But the question is talking about the same context. Do you think that IA is affected by geographic variant? So meaning to say, this specificity that you showed for a sample of patient will be affected by where you are practicing?
So the thought was when Google started their first project, the whole population they tested were in India. And they had a very two big groups that were actually involved in this study. They were very well organized groups, but generally their thought was you always need to have a more diverse population to get to actually give the best and more sensitive specific results. So the thought was in general that you actually, to get the best of AI, it's a general thought that was discussed in one of the meetings, is that you would develop the AI in that region. So basically you get your whole sample from that region, and then you assess patients from that region, and then you could get probably the best results you actually look for. Because generally getting a software that was tested in a population that was in the States and then saying that it will work here will definitely not be true. They need to test it, and this is what actually brought me into this, because people are approaching us because they want the data. They want to see what our population, and why would they want that? There are diabetics anywhere. Actually, in the States, they have more diabetic population than in Saudi Arabia in total. But the reason is because they actually would want to test their model against different kind of population, and then this will make it a better model.